Welcome to another edition of the SparkCom podcast, where we talk about innovation trends and what's coming next. How are you today, Adam?
Oh, I'm just fantastic. The weather's changing finally. Got a little colder.
All right. Well, good to hear from you. I want to jump right in today and talk about something that's in the news and also kind of reflect back on a couple other things that have been in the news the past couple of months regarding the antitrust lawsuit from the government to Google. And I want to use that as a starting point, but be able to then move on and talk about some of the other major players that have been disruptive innovators in their own right and have settled on these massive mountaintops of innovation. And the government's coming and saying that maybe there's got to be more competition. And I really want to frame it in a way that our listeners and viewers here can take value from understanding how it might affect their business. I Google 50 times a day, something. So what are your thoughts on that, Adam?
Well, when I think about Google and what's going on with that company, it's one of those issues where I think every one of our listeners and viewers should wish they have the problem. If you're successful enough to get the attention of the Justice Department for antitrust, you've done well. So maybe they should hope to be like Google, even if it does incur this sort of a problem long term. And second, I'd say keep in mind that this issue of antitrust is something that's been going on for a very, very long time. When Cornelius Vanderbilt went from shipping to railroads and he created a dominance in the railroads, they went after him. When Carnegie opened up his steel mills and kept buying up all the competitive steel mills and became a powerhouse of steel in the country, justice went after him. When Rockefeller poked holes in Pennsylvania and came up with oil and then continued to expand and created a nationwide and eventually global oil business, they went after him, right? When DuPont invested heavily in General Motors, owned a large stock percentage of it, owned a lot of dealerships and supplied a lot of materials, they became a victim of the Justice Department. When Bill Gates won the PC wars and Microsoft totally dominated, taking Apple virtually out of the picture, it was nothing but Unix server or Unix PC type products and the Apple product, they were attacked by the Justice Department. So this, just real quickly there, I've gone through a history of some of the antitrust cases, and what they all indicate is that if you're very, very good at innovation and you're very thoughtful and you're a good business person and you can grow your business really, really big, you're probably going to run into this kind of a problem. And it's much more, as I think I described there, an issue of politics than an issue of business. As business people, our job is to go out and meet customer needs and try to do that very profitably. These companies have all done that. But at some point, they do become very, very, very powerful. And when they become powerful, that's when politicians who are people that focus on power, that's their job, and they are people who want to be powerful, will pay attention. And that's what we have happening now. We have politicians who are saying, hey, who's running this country? Is it us, the legislators and the people that are sitting in Washington, D.C.? Are we running this country? Or is Google running this country? Is Facebook running this country? Is Apple running this country? Is Jeff Bezos at Amazon running this country? That's the question they're asking themselves, and they don't like it. It's a burr in their butt. And so what do? They turn to the Justice Department. In reality, what they should do is turn to legislation. If they don't like it, they should legislate. That's their jobs. But the first thing they're going to do is try to see if they can make a difference with somebody like Justice.
Yeah, I don't know. I have obviously we don't talk about politics in this show, but I tend to lean more in the libertarian perspective, where hey, let the business kind of, as long as they're not hurting anybody, let it happen. But have you seen a movie called The Social Dilemma?
Sure.
You saw it recently about social media and some of the ills of that. And, I understand that there's a big business play. Obviously, these are giant, if you put them all together, they're way over $1 trillion in value and so forth. Now, if the government is able to shake some of shake Google off of the top of the mountain, obviously there's no real second competitor. I mean, what's the number 2 search engine is YouTube is the number 2 search engine, right? And then I don't even know where Bing is in that list, but what does it mean to our people that are building a business right now, that are, that rely heavily on social media? And maybe we can go on and talk about Facebook and Twitter and your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that the issue here is, again, what can you do to Google, right? At the end of the day, what Justice did with Microsoft after years of litigation was they stopped making it so that the manufacturers of PCs were loading all of the applications from Microsoft onto the box, right? You got it with the operating system. If you wanted to get Office and other things, you had to buy them separately. So they created some separation there. And that was to keep Microsoft from not only getting monopoly in the operating system, but getting this monopoly in the user software as well. And that was the success that they had with that. So what's likely to happen here? Well, nobody's buying Google products, right? It's an advertising-based business. So the people that you would say were getting hurt from their domination have to be the people that are advertising. And I think we do see some small businesses that say that they're at a disadvantage to large companies in that advertising game. That does affect, though, not only Google, but Facebook and Amazon, who are in that same marketplace, right? That's going to be tough. You're not going to stop Google from being a leading search engine. The question is, can you change how they price to the advertisers, change how the ads are placed in front of customers? And that means looking into the technology. And that's going to be really tough for any lawyer to do, right? When you're looking at how these algorithms are created that push ads up on a page, down on a page, that determine what pages get an ad. When those algorithms are mystifying to all but a very few very powerful and very thoughtful technologists that work in a handful of companies, to try to combine law into understanding whether those algorithms are behaving in a way that are hurting society, that's going to be a really, really tough challenge, right? Because we as consumers, as you said, it doesn't cost us anything to use Google. So you can't say we were harmed by Google. You can only say that indirectly we might have been harmed because we didn't see all the products, because the ads were somehow manipulated. And this is where I think the small businessman can pay some attention to this. Because what you have to say is, do you feel like when you're placing ads on Google or Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, or Amazon, do you feel like you're being treated fairly as a small business person? Or do you feel like the bigger advertisers get an advantage? Now, if that's happening, I think you need to pay attention. And I think you really need to say, as a small business person, should I be supporting this action? Because I do feel like it's a game going to the big guys. That was one of the problems always with broadcast, is if you wanted to get your voice heard on radio, or you wanted your voice heard on television, it took a lot of money. And that's why the P&Gs, the great big consumer products companies, they always had this big advantage, because how could you get your message out when you were a small company? And then along came these platforms, and we could start running ad programs for $100, right? $100, $200, $500 for an ad program. And that democratized advertising in a way we hadn't seen before. So, 15 years ago, this was a tremendous benefit to small business. It was just huge. I would contend that today it's still far better off. I mean, if you want to get your message out there today, you can as a small business person that was blocked before when you just couldn't afford. Even maybe newspaper advertising was likely too expensive, or it was just a placement that nobody ever found you, right? So now what we have to say is, a small business person, are you being thoughtful about how you're placing ads on these platforms? And do you feel like you're getting hurt by the way they price? And if so, you should probably speak up. Yeah. On the other hand, are you learning from this exercise so that you can try to get more bang for your buck as you work across the platforms?
Yeah. And I think that for the people that are part of this, our community here, if they're not using these platforms like Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Google, they're not being part of that revolution that's been in motion for many years now, I don't see that they can survive and grow like they want.
Right.
There's a kind of a story you might have heard about Elon Musk back in the mid 90s. They were doing a new startup, and they went to the head of the Yellow Book, the Yellow Pages. You remember this story?
Go right ahead, please.
Yeah. So they they wanted to go and say, listen, there's this new thing called the internet. We want you to be part of it. We believe we can take all of your customers and put them in a database. They were kind of scratching around in this new thing, right? And what's the story? This CEO literally threw the book at him and said, no, nobody's ever going to move away from this Yellow Pages. And so take a hike, kid.
Right.
And so that's how it is. I mean, if you're not in there, and you talk to somebody who's got a towing business or somebody who's got a dry cleaning business, and they think, well, how am I going to be part of this fabric of the social media and of Google and whatnot? And if they're asking those questions, that means they don't necessarily understand that they have to be part of that fabric. If
Right.
I'm going to find, if my car breaks down, secondary, of course, to calling AAA, because I have AAA, but if I'm going to find a tow truck, I'm going to look up Google. I'm going to say who's got the local tow truck, and you know, what are their ratings, and okay, these guys seem to have their act together. I'm going to go with these guys. Boom, on the phone. They just made a little bit of money off of a contact from Google. And yeah, it's a whole framework there that isn't being, if you're not exploring it, you're behind.
Well, one of the things that we know for sure is that trends will always outweigh the government. So anytime something happens with the government that's off the trend, we can expect it will be reversed, because even governments just aren't powerful enough to change a trend, certainly in a semi-democracy country, but one that's as democratic as the United States. And most of Europe, I would have to put in there as well. And so let's take a look at that. So I've talked in the past about immigration. The way the population demographics are working out, you're going to have immigration that's going to move from China and India into other countries. And that's not going to be stopped. Eventually in the United States, there's so many old people that they're going to just, if you don't have any immigration, you don't have anybody working anymore, right? And your ratio of retirees to working people gets all out of whack. That's what's happening in Japan right now. Way too many older people, not enough younger people, but it creates all this economic dislocation, and it's hard to get anything done. And so your short-term immigration policy today might be negative on immigration. Do you expect it to stay? Well, no. Why? Because whenever people can't get things done, when nobody's out there picking the lettuce and nobody's out there taking care of retirees in nursing homes and all these different jobs that we want filled, that have historically always utilized immigrants because they're at the lower end of the pay scale where people are working their way up, then you will see the immigration will come back again, right? The trend will win out. Well, one of the biggest trends that are going to affect us for the next decade is one that started a decade ago, and that's the gig economy. And we see, if you look at these tools like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, they've been great for the gig economy. If I wanted to start making quilts, and I got the material and I got my family together and we started to make homemade quilts, and I wanted to sell them in 1980, how would I do that? How would I tell anybody I had homemade quilts? 1990s, it's still pretty hard, but now I can go run ads for homemade quilts on Google. Like I said, $100, I can get my message out there. I need a fulfillment. If I can make, if I get enough demand that I need 500 quilts, that might get a little hard to handle out of my garage. I need a fulfillment center to help me with orders. There sits Amazon, right? So yeah. Everything about the gig economy gets better. So we have Airbnb. What's that? Well, people had bedrooms in their houses that they weren't using. Lets me rent out that bedroom. That's a gig sale, right? And certainly the Uber and Lyft, they weren't started as full-time jobs. People didn't want to be a Lyft driver. People said, I've got a car. I'm not making enough money. If I drive my car and I give people rides, a couple hours a night, I get a few extra bucks in my pocket. That's classic gig thinking, right?
Yeah, totally.
That gig economy is powerful and it's growing, and we like it, right? I don't know about you, but there's no doubt that I see Uber and Lyft have made it better than what I had when I was restricted to only utilizing a call-up limo service or car service or a taxi, right? Taxis were often dirty, unkept, you're worried about your safety in terms of the vehicle itself. Even though they were registered and licensed, there were problems with cabs. Car services were very expensive. Uber and Lyft steps in the middle of that. I get some gig drivers, and my life got better, right? And so that's do I want that to go away? No, we don't want that to go away. But we get caught in these transitions where you say, okay, what happened was Uber and Lyft got so big that now there are people that say, that's all I do. I just drive an Uber car. That's my living. Now they want benefits and they would like things to get better. And what's happening is they're starting to say, well, I'm not really a gig worker anymore. I'm really an employee. And that's where we get the kind of legislation that's in the state of California on the ballot this year. But that's not true. Still you do have a lot of people working in the gig economy, and that law in California would try to classify all gig workers as employees. And now we're back to something in the 1960s, right? Where I'm sitting here, I got my small business, I'm making quilts. I have, 10 employees, and all of a sudden they want me to classify everybody as an employee, right? When in fact, what I do is I have groups of people that are coming in and working a few hours at a time. And there's actually not 10 full-time employees, but I have 60 people working for me on a part-time basis. And now you want me to classify all those people as employees? Why? Well, it's because you built a system that was based in the 1960s when there wasn't an alternative like gig work, right?
Right.
And so we put everything on the employer's back. All of a sudden, you had to collect unemployment insurance. You had to collect workers' compensation claims. You had to collect in health insurance. We made the health insurance something employers were responsible for. And if you look back and you say, well, that was putting a lot on their shoulders. And now today, the world's a different place. And with the world in a different place, should employers be responsible for all that? If we look across the world, America's the only country that does it that way. In other countries, health insurance, workers' comp, all these things are handled by the government. It's handled in a very different way. And that's what I think we're looking at now is the gig economy is coming along and it's getting bigger. That trend will not stop. The government will not stop it. And what we need is legislators at the state and federal level to start saying, wait a minute, how do I help gig workers do what they want to do, help the customers of gig workers get what they need, and supply for the social needs at the same time. That means they got to do something new, right? They can't do what they've always done. So perhaps part of it will be getting rid of older legislators. There's an awful lot of people in Congress at the federal level that are in their 70s and 80s, and they just are locked into old ways of thinking about how government works. So, retire some of these people out, vote them out, get some younger people in there, get some people to focus on what's going on in the world today. And that's where I think our audience, people need to keep thinking. Is like, you really got to think about what's your value proposition and what are the big trends, and say, okay, this is what's happening over here with a legislation or what's happening in terms of government action, and say, is this going to support the trends or does it not support the trends? And if you're trying to get legislation that's against trends to protect your business, you say, oh, I don't like that, then you better rethink it. Let me get Airbnb is a good example. Here in Las Vegas, Airbnb came in and people thought, that's pretty cool, But then it didn't take long before the hoteliers started saying, wait a minute. Now, instead of coming to my hotel and spending $300 a night for a hotel, people are starting to come to Las Vegas and they're renting a house or they're renting a part of a house and they're getting it at a much lower rate. So what they do, they pass laws in Clark County, Las Vegas. They say, oh, Airbnbs are illegal. That's why. It's to protect the old businesses, to protect the way they did business before. And see, those kinds of laws don't stick. They don't hang around because people say, wait a minute, how's that fair? How's that fair to the customer? Now you're forcing the customer to pay more because they got to stay in a strip hotel as opposed to letting the customer find the marketplace they want at the price point they want. And so those are short-term versus long-term. And from the point of view of our viewers, it's what is it you want to support? What should you be behind? And I always say, get on the trend, because the trend will win long term.
Absolutely. And this is what we talked about the other day regarding the cannabis market and where that's going. The market will find a way, even if it takes decades to go through. And we're obviously trending in that direction. And I think as business owners and entrepreneurs out there looking at their own business, they absolutely have to see how these four major trends are going to be part of their business. And if they're not, they're just going to be a small boutique lifestyle business, which nothing wrong with that. But a lot of the people that I talk to want to scale. They want to take their idea and they want to go to the next level. And I'm reminded of another conversation I had with a friend of mine who was doing medical device regulatory consulting. And a lot of the stuff that she would do is visiting the plant and visiting the different companies, and she had to be there. And as the manufacturers and medical device people started realizing that, okay, well, maybe it's not necessary to have her here, she packed up her bags and moved to Thailand and was doing the same work, obviously different hours, right? She's waking up in the middle of the night, but for her, she was able to live a way different lifestyle doing what she did right on her computer day in, day out. And the cost of living is she could live for $4 a day over there rather than, maybe like $80 a day here in the States.
Yeah. The trend towards work at home and shop at home is now 2 decades old. And there were a lot of us that were pushing for those things a long time ago. Why do I have to go to an office? And so it started off with, could I just go to the office 4 days a week, spend 1 day a week at home? And then if you had a job where you were on the road traveling like a consultant, somebody like that, it became, well, wait a minute, I'm gone 3 days a week with clients anyway. Why am I going into an office just to fill out expense reports? Why can't I do that from home? And so that started, 2 decades ago. The pandemic has accelerated, right? It's happening much quicker now. And you can tell, though, that it's a trend as opposed to just a reaction to the pandemic. When we look at things like rents in San Francisco, okay, wonderful town, I love to visit, but hey, it got really expensive to live in San Francisco and to live in the South Bay, right? So what's happened? Just since the pandemic started, let's say 6 full months, we started March, or 8, 9 months if you want to go back to January when we first saw the first pieces, but rents in San Francisco are down 25 to 33%. That's not just a pandemic reaction. That's people who didn't want to have to live in San Francisco getting the opportunity to leave.
Yeah.
They're not now tied there because of work. They can leave. They can try to keep their employment, keep their income, but don't have to be in San Francisco. So again, there are a lot of people who are like, oh, look at the trend. Everybody wants to be urban. Everyone wants to be in the big cities.
Yeah.
No, people were kind of like, there's an excitement to it. There are people who like it. But at the same time, there were a lot of people living in New York, Manhattan, living in San Francisco, living in downtown Los Angeles, living in some of these areas. They're like, this is just crazy expensive. Yeah. It takes a lot. I mean, it's the only way that I can make my career. I have to be here to make my career. Now they're saying, well, I don't have to be here. So we see moving away. New Yorkers are moving over to places like New Hope, Pennsylvania, right? They're moving to someplace else where they say, oh, gosh, I was paying $6,000 a month for an apartment in New York. For $6,000 a month, I can get a 4,000 square foot house in Pennsylvania. Right, so prices are going up, but they're like, hey, my lifestyle is so much better. Same thing in San Francisco. So again, you look at the trends and start to capture that and start saying, okay, what does this mean? Well, if you're running a business, why are you trying to put people back in the office? Why would that be an objective? Right. You know what? I'm not sure that should be your objective. What you should be saying is, how do I best serve my customers' needs?
Yeah, what's interesting is trends aren't only a business thing. I mean, these trends hit everybody. If you're a priest, these trends affect you. If you are running a nonprofit, if you are a government worker, right? We just talked about these demographics, people moving out of the cities. If you're a city planner or a transportation group, you need to be aware of that. And I often talk to people about what we do at Spark Partners, and then they say, well, it's not that interesting for me because I work for the city government. And then I say, okay. Then I start asking a few questions. And then within 2 minutes, they're hooked. They say, okay, I understand what you mean. I understand how I have to be paying attention to trends because it will affect ultimately my work in city planning, for instance.
Right. And so if we can take and move with the trends and combine them in order to even get more power out of them. So we start saying, okay, I got people now that are working from home and shopping from home, right? That's a big trend. Well, how could I add some artificial intelligence, to make their jobs more effective? Whereas before, I'd say, oh, just shove all those people in a building, they'll bump into each other in the hallways, they'll have conversations, and wonderfulness will occur. Now they're saying, well, we're not bumping into each other in the hallways anymore. Okay. How do I replicate that? By looking at workflows. How does the work flow? How does it did in the past? How's it flowing now? What's working? What's not working? And then how can I use technology to help add some intelligence to that so I can create the random interfaces? That's not impossible. You could say, oh, we used to do this sort of a thing. We ran into each other. Well, now let's start to have automated scheduled meetings where we'll set up a Zoom for 15 minutes. And the purpose of that is to come together and talk about our jobs in a way that we see if there's some benefit that could be happening if we took a different action, right?
Yeah.
So if we start combining the need, the thing about it, what we see happening in the pandemic is the real emergence of everybody being mobile, everybody saying, hey, I'm more productive when I'm asynchronous. When you shove all of us in a room, when you have to sit there, I'm sitting there for 2 hours, I only care about 10 minutes of the meeting. wow, what an unproductive waste of my time.
Right.
And so now we're saying, okay, the mobile and getting us out of the office, that's allowing us to work asynchronously. I don't have to be a full-time worker anymore. Now we can do this in a gig sort of way. If I need somebody for 10 hours a week, I can hire them for 10 hours a week. And if I want to do a job, I don't have to be beholden to one place and one where I go in. I have to work 40 hours a week. I can distribute my risk, my employer risk, by working for more and more people in a gig economy. And if I layer on top of that some kind of intelligence to start saying, hey, I can understand the workflow, I understand how things are being done, I can start to even add more value.
Right. Well, Adam, it sounds like you're thinking like an innovator, and this will be a shameless plug for our up and coming course called Think Innovation, which is really a full-featured course that helps people think like innovators.
Yeah.
So when you think growth, when you think success, think innovation, because innovation really is that lighthouse that's guiding us into the harbor of success. People don't understand that it's part of everything we do and is part of everything we will do.
Yep.
So with that, Adam, any parting thoughts here with the Think Like an Innovator in mind?
Always remember to keep the trends first. I mean, you can get caught up in something like a discussion around whether or not Google should be a target for justice. Be careful. Don't necessarily, I mean, great social conversation, I guess, but from a business point of view, what's the trend? And don't let an action like that or a third-party event affect your long-term planning and your scenario planning. Stay on trends.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation as always, Adam. We'll be talking to you next week. And for the viewers and listeners, start thinking like an innovator, and we'll be putting some more information out regarding our course, Think Innovation. So with that, Adam, have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Manny. Looking forward to the next show.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.